The company Solar States is teaming up with the Philadelphia School District to help prepare students for careers using solar energy.
Solar States flipped the switch of the largest solar panel array in Philadelphia.
Welcome back to another episode of Yo, Son! Welcome back to another episode of Yo, Son. I'm your host, Micah Goldmarkel, here with
Jared Pashko. And today on the show, we got a customer of ours, Christina Simeone. Welcome to the show.
Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
You're welcome.
Well, Christina is not only a customer, she's worked in the energy industry field for quite some time. Christina, can you give us a little review of your background here?
Sure. So I currently work for the National Renewable Energy Lab in their Grid Planning and Analysis Center, but I'm appearing on my own personal behalf and as a Solar States customer. Prior to that, I worked at the Kleinman Center for Energy Policy at the University of Pennsylvania, doing energy policy research. I've worked for the Penn Future, or Citizens for Pennsylvania's Future, directing their Energy Center program. I was the policy director for Al Gore's Alliance for Climate Protection, trying to get climate legislation passed in the House and Senate. And I worked for the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection. And somewhere in there, I got a PhD. in
Anything else? I don't know if you covered it all.
Basically, you've done it all.
At least on paper, maybe.
Well, I mean, it's so great to have a guest on who's had such depth of experience. How many years have you been in the energy industry here?
Gosh, I think unfortunately it's going on I'm approaching 20, I think.
Wow,
and
that's great.
Starting the show, but this year was really exciting because I actually got to get solar put on my house. Last year I made this switch to an electric car. This year I got the solar and the battery backup. So I was really excited. Even though I've been working in the energy sector for a long time, I finally was able to make the investment myself. And I'm really excited about that.
That's great. Well, I think we want to talk about your motivations for going solar, but also your experience. But first, I'd like to get a little bit into this knowledge base that you have around the energy industry. So clearly a lot has changed over the course of 20 years. I mean, my goodness, when I think about where the solar field was 15 years ago when I started in it, it's so different. What is some of the evolution that you've experienced in the energy industry, and what has surprised you the most over that time?
I guess one of the biggest things is the economics of the systems, and how the economics are really driving deeper penetration of renewable energy, especially on the wholesale side. For customers like myself, maybe a little less so, but just seeing how we kind of, with the rise of natural gas development and lower gas prices, you saw this huge shift from coal to gas. And now you're seeing another huge shift from gas to solar, wind, and batteries, and how that's kind of just dominating throughout the United States. Sure, there's a policy component of that, but the largest component is the economics. And that's been pretty exciting.
Yeah. So when you say on the wholesale side, you're talking about wholesale electrical rates, to be clear?
Yeah. And looking at how competitive these larger scale projects are against other technologies, and where investors are putting their money based on those comparative economics. And most of what we're seeing now on the wholesale side is, again, solar, wind, solar batteries, and these variable renewable energy technologies are just kind of taking over the queue of new projects, so to speak.
It's really interesting.
So that's like the interconnection queue where they're trying to bring new resources online that can satisfy the electrical demand throughout the grid. Are you talking about any specific locations in the United States, or is this more generally just all across the United States?
It's happening all across the United States. I mean, I think there are stronger policy drivers in places like California, places like New York, but the underlying economics are taking over everywhere. And it's changing the way that grid operators think about, operations, markets, price signals, how utilities have to think about pricing and bills to customers and the price signals that they're sending, and different policies related to even how customers like myself, I'm a retail customer, I'm like an end use customer, how we can use our solar resources and battery store resources at home to support the wholesale, the larger power system. That's kind of like virtual power plants. And so I think based on those underlying economics, the clean energy transition has really accelerated. And there's a lot of implications there, but it's overall, it's quite exciting.
Yeah, so you said virtual power plants. That's been a big sort of industry buzzword. Can you sort of define what that means to you as specifically as possible, but also how it could change how the grid works?
Sure. So if we think about a typical power, like a traditional power plant, say a gas plant or a coal plant, you have a large generating station that's in one location. Virtual power plants is really the idea of aggregating a lot of much smaller resources, kind of at the residential level, for example, and using the power supply through solar or batteries at those homes or businesses, to aggregate all that power together and bid it into the wholesale market, provide services at wholesale through either supply or maybe offsetting your load.
Yeah. And actually, I believe that they're doing something really interesting with this in California, where they're utilizing all of these kind of distributed small battery systems
Mm-hmm.
in place of a peaker power plant or rolling blackouts, right? Like, I remember watching Entourage and thinking, I don't know what a rolling blackout is. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a rolling blackout in Philadelphia, but like,
Yeah.
they're turning off parts of the grid so that the overall system isn't overloaded. Well, they didn't have any brownouts last year because they're signaling to all of these hundreds and thousands of residential batteries, hey, discharge your energy to your local, kind of transmission lines, or
Mhm.
even it's below transmission lines, right? It's off of transformers. It's like really, really local. And
Mhm.
that's going to just kind of that's going to provide the support power needed so that
Mhm.
these peaker power plants don't need to fire up, or these rolling blackouts don't need to happen. It's really kind of fascinating.
It's really exciting, and it changes the way, in a lot of respects, the grid operates by taking advantage of different resources, and also can provide new revenue streams for homes and businesses that invest in solar or batteries.
Yeah.
And that may also in the future change how we think about interconnecting resources at the distribution level. Earlier we were talking about interconnecting resources at that wholesale level, at the transmission level, but it may change the way we think about sending signals out into the public about where solar would be most valuable or where batteries would be most valuable from a geographic standpoint.
Right. The other thing that I think is so interesting about it all is, as you were talking about the economics, I think a lot of kind of name brand entities in the energy industry are kind of the biggest leaders in solar and renewable development because of the economics. And
Mhm.
it's not this like widely told story that Saudi Arabia is investing in tons of solar, that China, the largest coal polluter, is investing a ton in solar, that companies like BP and Exxon are investing a lot in this renewable energy. And it's because of the economics. And I feel like that's a story that should be, cheered on by everybody, because they kind of are a big bellwether to folks that maybe are not quite on the bandwagon of renewable. If they're doing it, we could do it too. So
Mhm.
it's like that whole aspect of this is the most sustainable, most economical energy for large corporations that are doing this on a massive scale and have been for decades and centuries. That's like a powerful statement.
It is. And having been in this like clean energy space for, approaching 20 years, I think, early in my career, the politics were so frustrating because it is a, very political issue addressing climate change, clean energy. And there have certainly been, kind of an evolution at the federal level about some of these issues, and certain states have been leaders and some have been laggards. But it's really the underlying economics that are driving things forward. And so even in absence of a national energy policy, we're still seeing clean energy resources kind of take over with respect to like what's being proposed to be built and what is being built.
Sure, right. Like solar and wind and stuff I keep reading are sort of the largest newcomers to the grid. But that said, there are challenges in front of us. And I know you look at transmission across the United States in your position. What do you see as the challenges facing mass adoption of renewable energies?
Well, I think there's like in the short term, there's some challenges about the timing of retirement of thermal generators and how fast the new like cleaner generation resources can be built out, and is there a mismatch? And we also have this push to electrify a lot of end uses, move from like natural gas in our homes for space heating, for example, move from gasoline to electricity for transportation. So we also have some drivers of load increases. So I think there's some concerns about, is the timing all going to match up? And there's things that grid operators can do to preserve reliability. If they need a resource that is intending to retire and they need it to stay online, they have ways to do that. We're also looking at the role of expanded grid interconnectivity and interregional transmission to allow for more efficient utilization of resources. So when one area of the country has a lot of sun or wind and another area doesn't, we can move power long distances to, again, improve the efficiency of how we utilize resources. And this may also be very important as we continue to see these extreme weather events, the polar vortices, the cold snaps, where we're having some competition for gas-fired resources. So gas fuel supply for space heating for homes and businesses at the same time where we're having a high demand for power generation, and then power generation ends up losing out just because of the way they procure gas. And so we have some issues there. So the transmission, greater interconnectivity of our systems can help with a lot of those issues.
What do you see as the sort of transition period? How long is it going to take to, say, get to 80% or 50%, then 80%? Is it possible to get to 100% renewables?
I don't want to prognosticate on the timing so much. I think, is it possible? Yes. I think, once you hit certain kind of benchmarks like 50%, 80%, what you have to do to get to a higher level of penetration starts to change. I think, again, the interregional transmission starts to get much more important as you get to these higher penetrations, like 80%.
Right.
Et cetera, from a reliability standpoint, an operation standpoint, and also an economic standpoint. Like if we can start to utilize some of the resources, for example, in extremely sunny areas or extremely windy areas that are farther away from load centers, take advantage of that high renewable energy potential and move that around as needed, will be very helpful as we get to very high penetrations.
Yeah. It's also really hard, I think, for heavy industry, right? There's certain processes that require tremendous amounts of thermal energy, or I guess energy, but generally it's been thermal energy. It would be.
Yeah, and I think, the energy intensive, like trade exposed industries are always something that has to be, gently considered when thinking about like national carbon policy or even regional carbon policies, and how putting a price on carbon will affect a particular state or a particular nation's energy intensive industries, and what are the solutions there.
Sure. And
that is not my area of expertise, though.
right. But I mean, isn't it incredible how the space has evolved technologically? I mean, it's just so different. Is there anything? Let's look into the future. What are some things that you
Wait, I got a
see from
question. I got a
your
question about the
perspective?
technology. Do
Okay.
you think the economics that have changed over the past, 15 years, both of you guys have great experience. Do you think it's largely been driven by costs coming down or by technology improving? If you had to choose one.
I guess a little bit one begets the other. Like the technology
Yeah.
improves, and then like you get to some kind of economies of
Right.
scale, and then certainly on solar, like the per watt cost has just dropped and dropped and dropped.
Yeah.
And I think on the other side of the balance sheet, there's significant risk in long-term infrastructure investments, 10, 15, 20-year investments. There's a carbon pricing risk. So that also, I think, is a factor when there's these long-term.
Can you describe that? What you mean by a carbon pricing risk?
So when an investor is looking at a potential power investment and they say, okay, this gas plant right now, it may be competitive in this particular market, but how competitive will it be if there's a carbon price? And what's the likelihood that over the lifetime of this asset, say it's 10, 15, 20 years, what's the likelihood that there will be a carbon price? In addition, because they're fuel dependent resources, you also have exposure to commodity markets. So what is my risk that this asset becomes more or less competitive based on the underlying fuel price, absent a carbon price? So are we going to be exporting more gas as LNG, and then my costs are going to go up, I'll become less competitive, I'll get less return on investment. Again, price volatility with fuel.
Right. That's really what I was trying to drive at on a residential scale of, people looking into the future. I think it's a really good way to look at things is, well, if it's gotten so much better over the past 20 years, why don't I wait 5 more years? It's going to get even better. But what's the price of carbon of waiting if your energy prices go up, or if you start being taxed, or if you lose an incentive? So I think what you're describing is applicable to the residential space as much as it is the heavy industrial utility scale space.
Mm-hmm. And I think the larger investors, I always overestimate people's interest in like these electricity issues. I think like the general public, a lot of them have like environmental thoughts about the environment and climate change and whatnot. But when we talk about like electricity policy and all these like technical policies and whatnot, I think it's all so cool, but I think the average person is like, whoa, this is so complicated. I have my own job. I have my own priorities in life. And this is too complex to get into. I think on the commercial and industrial side, you have professionals that are dedicated to reducing energy costs. So they can put a lot more time into, running the numbers and seeing what investments work.
They're not doing it after work. They're doing it at work.
At work, exactly. They're getting paid to do it. So I think, from a residential standpoint, I do think like some of these new policies, building up some of these markets and making these technologies more accessible to the average person, and like taking all of the complexity out of it and just getting it to work. Like, maybe that happens over the next 10 years. And then from there, I think things are going to really change.
Cool. Well, I got to go back to my original question though. Looking into the future, I want you to look into your crystal ball and say, you know what, this would be interesting if it happened in the future, or maybe people aren't expecting this. What do you see?
Gosh,
Or is
I'm
it just, hey, we're just going to roll out a lot more solar and wind, which I'm fine with too.
Yeah, like because I think the market, gosh, how can I say? I think there are so many policy drivers that if we did have a national policy and there was greater market certainty, and there was a push to adjust markets to facilitate the transition instead of what happens now, which is like it's this push and pull between the powers that be and the powers that will be, for making lots of puns here. So I think
good
that,
fun.
yeah, that could really accelerate things. There are also things that could slow the transition. Based on, I think a lot of it is more political in nature. So and certainly state level policy now seems to be a huge, in absence of federal action, state level policy seems to be huge drivers.
Micah, I want to know what you think.
Yeah, me too.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
putting Christina on the spot. You're in the hot seat now.
Yeah. I'm on the spot. I think that we're going to see energy storage in ways that people aren't expecting. I think that energy storage right now is really synonymous with batteries, and I don't think. I mean, I think batteries are going to play a role for sure, a large role, but that we're going to start storing energy in like ways of like pretty simple, actually, like pumping water up a hill, or and then releasing it at night so that it can turn a turbine or something like that, where we're getting very clever and creative, but sort of simplifying things rather than making them more complex for energy storage, because there's lots
Especially
of ways
on
you
grid
can
scale.
Yeah, on grid scale, it's like there's lots of ways you can store massive amounts of energy without involving chemistry of a battery, and I'd like to see that really rolled out, and I think it will. I think people will start looking at the economics of those different options and saying, "Gosh, pretty cheaply we can build a reservoir right up there and release water every night, and that's a great way of storing some of the power that we do." Or even under the ocean, like balloons at the bottom of the ocean that are under pressure that can get squeezed and have forced air come out. There's lots of different ways of storing energy. So that's what I see for the future. Hopefully, that maybe people aren't looking out. But let's use this as a transition back to now and say, Christina, you've gone solar. Tell us about your experience and tell us, why you decided to go solar and get a battery.
Yeah, so I've wanted to go solar for a long time. I had been moving around a lot. I think I moved like 4 or 5 times in 5 years. So I did a lot of moving, finally settled down into a place that I knew I was going to be for a long time. And I went through the process. I knew I wanted to get solar and batteries. I knew I wanted to have 100% backup. I wanted to like maximize my system size, get 100% backup, and be able to island on my own. I started by, doing some of the easiest things, like going online to some of the solar providers who, they'll do the whole software for you. And, but I had a really tough time trying to customize the system to my house, the roof of my house. I have all kinds of dormers, and I had trouble trying to get the attention of some of these companies to like, I don't like the way this looks, or we need to, I just couldn't get a lot of satisfaction. I then explored trying to get the solar shingles, which would have looked beautiful on the roof, but the cost was outrageous.
It's astronomical. I was shocked at it myself.
Oh my gosh. And I loved the way it looked. It was beautiful, but it made it completely unaffordable. And then like I ended up reaching out to you guys, and I've obviously known about solar states for a long time. And I love how you guys are so focused on like, the workforce and the education, and Philadelphia, obviously, because I'm, born and raised in Philadelphia. So I had a great experience because you had like somebody who actually came out to me and like discussed, my issues and customized the design to exactly what I was looking for. So I ended up with almost 14 kilowatts of solar panels on my roof, which is a 99% offset, and then 3 Tesla batteries. So I can basically island indefinitely if there's an outage. And in my area, there's a lot of trees and it's overhead power lines and there are outages. But I'm really super interested in not only those components, but also experimenting with like moving to time of use rates. Pennsylvania has fabulous retail rate net metering, which I'm sure, will probably not be there forever. So I'm super excited to, see what happens when I switch rates. I have an electric car, so I think that's going to be, it's going to be cool to see the economic effects. When Pennsylvania does come up with its virtual power plant participation models at the retail level, I'm really excited to participate there. So yeah, I'm interested in all of implementing all the things that I've like studied over the past 15, 20 years.
That's great. That's great. Well, we were super excited to do the installation. I'm glad you mentioned the sort of shape and form of your house, because that is always a big challenge, is sort of figuring out the balance of energy production and aesthetics. And I think that that's something we take a lot of pride in at Solar States, is helping our clients to really find that right balance of what's what.
And that was a big concern for me because it's like, my house is my largest investment. And working with some of these other companies and these kind of like computerized designs, the front of the house, it looked a mess, because I had all these dormers. So there'd be like one panel here and one panel. And it just, I'm like, I want this to add to the value of my house, not detract by looking aesthetically unpleasing. So the solution was really elegant in the end. We kept everything off the front of the house and like maximized every spot in the back. And luckily I had exposure that allowed me to do that. But I was so happy in the end because I got everything I wanted at like a very reasonable cost, especially compared to, when the alternative for a roof like mine would be the shingles, and that was nuts.
Yeah, just out of this world. Well, I'm always hungry, always have food on my mind. I'm thinking about the fact that I'm going to go out with my wife for something to eat tonight, and wanted to see what in your neck of the woods. You're sort of on the edge of Philadelphia there. What are your favorite food spots where you are?
Favorite food spots. So we we're right kind of in the Ardmore area. So we go to Rosa Mexicana a lot, like Mexican food. But I couldn't, not endorse Angelo's on 9th Street in
a classic.
Because every time we're in the city, that's the spot.
That's
Absolutely.
the spot.
Yeah.
Classic pizza joint. That's really that's good. Do you get anything other than pizza there, or is it
usually the sandwiches, like the steak sandwiches?
Yeah. Did you see the collaboration they did with Bradley Cooper up in New York?
No.
Oh, they like opened up like a pop-up food truck and were like, it was wild.
Oh, nums. That sounds great.
That does sound good.
Where are you going for dinner, Micah?
I'm headed out to Elemento tonight. I've been there a couple times. Steven Star joint, but I really like it up on Frankfurt Avenue. It's
That's
sort
some
of
cool.
Mexican
food.
Yeah. I love it. And I had an outstanding meal actually the other night. My wife and I went to Calais. She took me there actually as I believe, a delayed birthday present. And my mouth was on fire. I have not had fire like that.
If you do not like hot food, do not go to Calais.
Woo! That place was fire. I mean, it was delicious. I loved it. But Wow, I haven't had fire like that in a while.
I had a really special
Yum.
treat as a holiday present on Christmas. Christmas Eve, I went with some friends to this place called the Hoagie Room, which is
Huh.
an omakase style meal at Pizza Badia. So you sit down
Oh,
in this
yeah.
really small, intimate room, and there's like a hoagie aficionado that is hand making hoagies in front of you with like only the most decadent meats. And
Wow.
let me tell
Wow.
you, I mean, we had one veggie hoagie, one tuna hoagie, one Italian. They brought out a whole bunch of small sides to start with. It was delicious. I got the bread frozen in my freezer. They give you to take home. It was incredible.
Wow.
That
Wow. Well,
sounds
Badia,
delicious.
yeah, Badia,
Yeah,
you know, you're getting it done right. That's a,
they know how to do it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, Christina, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you all for listening. This has been another episode of Yo, Son. I'm your host, Micah Goldmarkel, signing off here with
Jared Pashko. Peace out,
Peace
everybody.
out.
Peace out.